The projects are not the challenge. It's making sure that we have the right resources to do them in the way that we want to do them. And it is a challenge.
Business of Architecture, episode 198. Hello, I'm Enoch Sears, and this is the podcast for architects, where you'll discover tips, strategies, and secrets for running a profitable and impactful architecture practice. I'd like to invite you to discover how to double your architecture firm income and create your dream practice of freedom and impact by downloading my free 4-part architecture firm profit map. As a podcast listener, you can get instant access by going to freearchitectgift.com. Today's podcast is sponsored by AIA Advantage partner BQE Software, the makers of ArchiOffice. ArchiOffice is the only office and project management software designed specifically for architects. It helps you manage people and projects while you focus on designing great architecture. So whether you're working remotely or on-site, ArchiOffice allows you to monitor the status of your projects and tasks and send out invoices in an accurate and timely manner. Get your fully functional 15-day trial of ArchiOffice by going to businessofArchitecture.com/demo.
Good afternoon, my name is Rion Willard and I'm here with the Business of Architecture for the UK, and I have the good pleasure of speaking with Holly Lewis, who's one of the founding partners of We Made That. We Made That was established in 2006 and is an architecture and design studio that places the architect's civic responsibility at the forefront of their design and results in a practice which is delivering very innovative built work in the public realm. I had the pleasure to study with Holly many years ago at the Bartlett, and during our undergrad, and I've also had the pleasure to experience many of their buildings or their work firsthand, such as last year's exhibition States of Mind at the Wellcome Trust, and of course near my hometown in Croydon, the South End Road streetscaping. So thank you, Holly, for being with me this afternoon.
Thanks very much for having me.
And I'd just like to start, just tell us how you began the practice. How did you and Holly, you've been going for 10 years, you're quite young architects. How did it all begin?
Complimentary that we're young, not so much anymore. It started, I could tell you that there was some big plan and it was all very deliberate and we've just executed a plan, but it's not true. It was really by chance that we started the practice, by chance, and just pursuing things that we liked doing. So after we'd both finished our degrees, we were both, myself and Oliver, working in different practices, and we saw that there was a competition to design a beach hut that was open at the time, and you had to just submit a model of your beach hut proposal, and we thought, well, we could spend the weekend by the seaside, have a nice time, make a little model, and that would be fun, and nothing really more than that. And then we won the competition. I think they had hundreds and hundreds of these little beach hut models that arrived, and they picked 4 or 5 to build. So then as part 1 students, I guess 21, 22, we had £20,000 to build this beach hut. So that's kind of chucked us in at the deep end.
Yeah.
And we did it. That was the first project 001 in the folders, and yeah, it all grew from there, I suppose.
And from delivering that first project, kind of unassisted, did you have any mentors or anybody helping you, or was it very much a kind of like, we've got to figure this out ourselves? No,
we heavily relied on our practices that we were working for. I remember having design reviews with them, trying to figure out how we're going to build it, who we're going to ask to do it. We had a lot of help, I would say, and engineers that we're still working with, that we brought into that project to figure out how we do the roof of this stupid beach hut. And lots of talking with other people and trying to get their benefit of their experience.
And how did that grow over the next sort of 10 years into what you're doing today?
So we're now 17 people in, like you say, 10 years, and that's grown relatively quickly over the last 5 years. But for the first 5 years after the beach hut, we were both still working in practice, then going back to do our master's degrees and subsequent kind of placements and training, part 3 and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So for those 5 years, we were still doing projects and just looking for things that seemed to be interesting. It has to be interesting enough to do it on your evening or weekend. So it was all things that we thought would be good fun. it was a major benefit to us that the beach hut was for Lincolnshire County Council. So our first client was a public sector client, and we were always interested in how a wider public would engage with the work that you do, so that the beach hut was a public thing that could be hired. And we were really interested in how people engage with your design work, basically. And so that's been a kind of continuous thread from the first project all the way through. And that now means that sort of 95% of our clients are local authority clients. But it just grew from doing kind of small project by small project by small project. And then I think by project number 31, that was when we both quit our jobs and both were kind of all in on making it pay the bills.
Yeah. And what was the difference from going, from making that leap, going all in to what you were doing before, and how, like we were just talking about how, you're beginning to identify as being a businesswoman as opposed to an architect. What was that that shift, and when did it happen?
I think it's when you have to pay other people's mortgages. I think that's that's a really clear point. No, I mean, it's obviously those first 5 years we were building a client base and working. We did some work on arts projects in the Olympic Park that were really exciting and growing in confidence and knowledge. And then by the time, in fact, there wasn't really a big leap of faith into the unknown. At the point where Oliver finished his master's, he didn't go out and look for work. He just knew that we could get enough work to at least pay his part of the rent.
Yeah.
And so that process has been pretty gradual. I don't think that there was a small moment where we'd won a project to design a natural play space in Three Mills that was for the London Legacy Development Corporation, or what is now that, and the Lee Valley Regional Park Authority, that I had to quit my job, and that felt a little bit scary. But that was probably the biggest leap of faith that we ever had to take. And even by that point, there was some money in the business, and we'd been kind of building up. And then after that, we, over the last 5 years, we've probably kind of doubled in size and turnover every year, more or less. And that, again, has felt quite gradual. To go from 2 to 4 people wasn't too scary. Then from 4 to 9, not so much. And so it's been like that, really. I don't think that there's been a kind of sudden scary moment, but just building. Unfortunately, it's taken 10 years to build to this. But
and how? What have been the most important relationships that you've cultivated? 'Cause it sounds like those early projects. There was a lot of relationships that were, you were laying the foundations. You were kind of putting together. You guys had found obviously something that was deeply interesting and important to you. How did you go about cultivating those relationships with your clients?
I look at our client base now and I feel really lucky that we have it. And I can't, again, it wasn't like there was a kind of killer strategy that we executed. But from that first local authority client, you can then go, well, we've already done a project for a council, so we can do it for you as well. And we've always been committed to doing the best possible job. And I think everybody would say that they are that. But we have been lucky enough to have repeat clients from lots of local authorities. And that's led to us being also on a couple of framework agreements with the GLA and the Mayor's Office in London, the Greater London Authority, and Transport for London. That there's a lot of repeat business. So yeah, there's relationships with those clients, and we've been able to always use the last one to trade up for the next one, I suppose. And we do think about it like that, like it's a trade up.
Yeah.
And how much above our weight can we punch realistically with what we've got in the bank?
Yeah.
And also, who do we need to work with to get those jobs? I would say if there are kind of strategies or tactics that we use, we definitely look at a job that we think is really interesting and put it in the crosshairs.
Yeah.
And how can we get that one? And so there's relationships with the clients, but we've got lots of really great relationships with consultants and sub-consultants, or where we're in a sub-consultant relationship with someone bigger. I've been told by, we've got a communications guy now, a PR guy, and he said that most people don't have a list of as long as ours of other architects that they work with. We often find ourselves in relationships with other architects. We're working with Hawkins Brown at the moment. We've got good relationships with Carriacou Switch Carson. I mean, there's quite a long list actually of other architects, and we we work with them. We enjoy it. That collaboration is good fun. But it does help us get into rooms that we otherwise wouldn't be in. And I would say that's quite definitely tactical.
Yeah. And how did those relationships begin? Were they interested in what you were doing and they kind of sort of picked up on and saw, or was it you directly approaching them and saying, actually we've got something here of value that we could bring to your projects. We've got a particular way of viewing public realm. Yeah,
it varies. I mean, that the architecture scene in London is quite small, so you've probably met most of those people at a party one way or another.
Yeah.
So quite a few things come that way. We don't really, I can think of only one practice that we've worked with multiple times that we did a sort of cold call of like, we're looking at this tender, do you want to team up? And that's actually proved really fruitful. That's with some economists though. We've got an urban research sort of wing of the practice at the moment, and we work with these economists called Regeneris. And I just called them and said, look, how about it? But we don't do that very often. And we do get approached. I think we've become associated with or a little bit known for public realm and public spaces, and I think that the fact that we're not necessarily competing with some of those architects means that it's easier to develop a relationship, or that there's an identifiable bit of the project that might be our responsibility. So that's also kind of come up, and in those cases we've sometimes been approached by other architects.
And did that assist you in getting into framework agreements? Did you team up with other architects to get that, or
no? Though the frameworks that we're on, or one particular framework that we're on that is the most, which is the Mayor of London one, we went for on our own, and I think we have the open-mindedness of the Greater London Authority to thank for that, and their support and sort of trust, I guess, that the kind of meagre offerings that we had to put into that tender, that they could see the potential in those, and I guess trusted that what was shown in those could be applied to larger and bigger scale things, which we hope has proven to be the case.
And what's been your sort of proudest obstacle that you've overcome in the last sort of 10 years?
Yeah, it's really hard to say that, because I would say that it has been this gradual kind of building and growing. I mean, we're sitting in a room surrounded by boxes, but I'm starting to feel quite proud of this office and the team that we have now. And, we've overcome the investment of moving into this place and doing it up. And you look around and think, actually, this is nice.
Yeah,
I like it. And it wasn't a kind of massive individual hurdle, but it's been a kind of an incremental build.
It's just been the constant
and then you look down
persistence.
the hill that you've climbed up and think, like, actually we've come quite a long way, and that feels good.
Yeah. And how have you gone about, with such sort of rapid growth in the last few years? What's been the biggest challenges there in terms of, say, employment and finding the right people? How have you gone around creating the right teams?
I feel like I have to start by saying I love our team. They're so great. And that is probably the biggest challenge. Actually, I think if we could just turn a tap on or kind of open a magic door and there'd be a perfect person behind it, we could get loads more work than we have now. It's not the projects are not the challenge. It's making sure that we have the right resources to do them in the way that we want to do them. And it is a challenge. And I think it's difficult to describe yourself. We're a little bit offbeat as a architecture practice. We don't do loads of buildings. There's a lot of public space, quite a lot of research, and increasingly more kind of master planning and urban design. I don't think that appeals necessarily to all architects. And we get different levels of responses at different levels of seniority. So maybe younger sort of out of college type people seem to find us more appealing than more senior, very serious people. Yeah, I think we struggle actually to get that more senior level of involvement, and I suppose to convince people that we are serious. We've got a slightly silly name. We're sort of quite young. That is a challenge for us, definitely, and hopefully increasingly the work sort of speaks for itself, and that we'll overcome that challenge. But it's definitely difficult to find the right people. Yeah. And I feel incredibly lucky that the people that we have are here and that they do such good work for us and they don't run off and go somewhere else. but I think that is the biggest thing that we have to kind of keep working towards and working against, is getting the right people involved, because that's what we're doing.
Yeah, and it's kind of constantly cultivating your team and not wanting them to sort of leave and
yeah, we haven't had a massive problem with that. People mostly seem to be quite happy. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the maintenance of that team is the really important thing.
And how have you done that? What kind of learning curves have you gone through in terms of just finding yourself in a position now where it was just you and Ollie, and now you've got kind of a good sized team, and learning about the people skills that are involved in doing that. And
we're still learning. I don't know. I guess it's the same way that you approach a project, right? Is that you're a human being, they're a human being. Let's be reasonable about this. I mean, we do try and make sure that we're properly resourced, so we don't ask people to work really long hours. We think if you're going to design things to be out in the city and be kind of relevant and useful to normal people, you need to live your life like a normal person. So if you're always in the office being an architect or doing clever architecture things, then that's not going to work. And
you want to bring some of that design ethos into the ethos of the culture of your company.
Yeah, absolutely. And so yeah, we try and make sure that no one's here at the weekend, and we're not working late hours. Everyone's sort of got a life outside, and I think that's really important. I don't know, there's silly little things. Try and have parties, and we've sort of established a slightly weird tradition where our Christmas party is organised by me and Oliver without telling anyone, and then it's a surprise and no one knows where we're going, and we always seem to, or not always seem to, we deliberately always do some kind of making activity. So we've made neon in the past. This year we did pewter casting, sort of stupid things, but I think it's enjoyable.
Yeah,
I seem to like it,
and it kind of helps keep the group bonded. And
yeah, exactly. And there's jokes of where are we going, what are we doing, do I need my passport, which they haven't needed to so far, but we try to be thoughtful. You'd have to ask them.
And how have you kind of grown the company in terms of your marketing, and how you, because it seems that you guys you've got a very kind of niche knowledge base that you're working on, and actually starting to produce quite an impressive set of skills for public realm. How do you get that knowledge out? How do you sort of help other people find out about you? How do your clients find out about you? Is it a case of, do you do a lot of sort of publishing or writing, and people kind of find you through that, or you're giving lectures and public speaking? I
need to preface the answer by saying we probably need to do a lot more of that. I think we could do that much better. And that's part of the reason why we've now got somebody to help us with our PR. We've always been really conscious of the quality, I guess the aesthetic of the practice. We're really careful, I think, about what things look like that go out. And, the website was one of the when we won that first project, the website was one of the first things that we did. So we try to make sure that when you do hear about us, you hear about us in the way that we want you to. Yeah. But we probably need to do more to spread the word. We're also operating in an environment that allows us to be slightly more passive, because all of our work is public. It has to be publicly procured and tendered. So the tenders and the opportunities and contracts have to be advertised, and we see those adverts and we respond to them. So that puts us in a slightly passive role, and we also have been talking recently about needing to be more active. But there's loads and loads and loads, and anybody who's even had a look would know all of these tender portals with tons and tons of projects about whatever, IT infrastructure, and I got one today about cyber terrorism, all kinds of things completely unrelated, but any public sector spend of any decent scale has to be made public. So that kind of in some ways lessens the need, I think, for marketing, because we're able to spot opportunities that apply for us and respond to them.
And why do you prefer working in the public realm as opposed to working with private individuals? Do you do that as well? Do you have private clients or private residential projects like that?
No. That's been a rule from the beginning, is that all of our work is public. if I'm giving a talk about what we do, I sometimes say something which is probably a bit rude, but I'm not that interested in choosing taps for other people, especially not really rich people. And my small experience of working in practices that do some of that work is that, and that's a perfectly well established, like perfectly respectable way to build your practice as a young practitioner. Well, and I only say it, it's tongue in cheek. But
what's really interesting for me is to see you guys, you haven't done that. And, I myself, for example, as soon as I set up a practice, the sort of the formula, the ready-made formula is to go and find a private client and sort of start networking with affluent people and figure out that. And then you might kind of, a few years down the line find, this doesn't really fit me the way that I wanted to. So to sort of begin from the outset with, we're not going to do that is quite bold and I find it quite inspiring actually that you've made that. That was the sort of the vision. And because a lot of people wouldn't do that. A lot of people wouldn't necessarily be aware of their passion or what it is that they want to be doing.
Yeah, it's hard for me to reflect on that because that was something that we always held true to. We would say no to those, and in some sort of slightly arrogant way, we sort of quite enjoyed that as well. No, we don't do that. We don't do that type of thing. We're not into that. But I think because of the way that the practice has built relatively gradually, we've been able to do that. And we have never felt like, oh God, well, I need to do it because we need to have the money coming in.
Yeah.
Because for at least the first 5 years, we didn't need to have the money coming in particularly. And by that point, we'd built enough of a kind of portfolio of work and clients that we didn't need to rely on those bits of work. So it probably was a bit of youthful arrogance. But we were clear, like what we're interested in is how the wider public relate to the built environment. And that we hold true to that and we really enjoy it. So why would you spend your time doing something that you didn't enjoy? And it turns out you can also pay the bills off it. Yeah. So that's a happy kind of, not coincidence, but a happy result of taking that stance from the beginning.
And what advice would you give to people who are wanting to work more in the public realm, particularly sort of younger students when they're coming out of university? How do you feel first, like the kind of, how well does our architectural training, because it's such a long incubation period for an architect, and obviously when you set up practice, you've got to learn things. The only way to learn it really is through the experience of learning it. Do you think there are any areas in our training which could be improved or could be more assistance? Because you look at the statistics, sort of 50% of all architects or people who train end up running their own practice. And it's a creative profession, and at the heart of it, you kind of want to be making your own stamp. Do you think there are any sort of areas in our education that could be sort of altered or?
Yeah, well, it's a big source of frustration for me that nobody ever mentioned in my, maybe right at the end, so in the first maybe 6 years of my architectural training, nobody ever said you might run your own practice. It's sort of assumed that you'll go and work for someone else. It turns out I actually really enjoy it and maybe I'm all right at it. And so that seems like a major oversight in the education because it should have at least been on the table, and I don't think it was even mentioned. But my feeling is that it's very difficult to expose students, and I've done a bit of teaching, but it's difficult to expose students to the full breadth of what it is to be an architect in practice in the environment of a school. So my advice to the students was always to look for live projects that they can do and to feel empowered to do them because that's what we did, and that has been okay. And there's quite a lot of, building a structure for a festival, or there are opportunities out there. So if you think you might be interested, try it and see how it goes. Like it's actually, and then lots of people find that it isn't for them, and that level of responsibility is a bit difficult or challenging, and that maybe having a salary that's paid by someone else is much more comfortable, and all of that is absolutely fine. But I think that it's a slightly defeatist attitude. I'm not sure that universities is the way to put this knowledge into people's brains, and that actually just being out there and doing it is probably the better way. That's why things like the London School of Architecture are quite interesting, and I'm curious to see what comes out of that. But you can just try and do some projects, and a few thousand, 10,000, whatever little builds are really great at exposing you to the types of skills that you need, and pretty low risk for both parties, really. I'm not advocating tons of untrained people going out and building hospitals or anything. And I don't think that you'd find the opportunity, because there is quite a risk-averse sort of attitude. But I think you can go out and try a few things, see how it goes.
And where do you see your guys going in the next 10 years? What are your sort of aspirations for the company? What kind of projects would you like to be doing?
So there's a document. Obviously, there's a document that kind of says that. And what we've said is that we want to be influential contributors to the built environment. So that there isn't a sort of limit on that, or a number of staff or anything. But we constantly are hungry for more influence. That's the vision.
Force,
yeah, it is. So far, we're almost exclusively working in London. And we'd be really happy to work in other places. I think there's definitely anybody that's interested in public engagement with the built environment, or just the nature of civic space and civic relationships between what we build and who builds it and who it's for. So that's a conversation that applies kind of in all kinds, everywhere. Yeah, cities particularly, but all over the world. So there's definitely an ambition to spread beyond London, and I think, the current sort of conversation is also a little bit, we need to get beyond always being called emerging. Yeah. And just to be just a practice that does some interesting stuff. We're both, I'm 32, Wally's 33, so there's a few more years for us still to be young architects, by architect standards, and no one else's. But we're quite keen to get beyond that, I think, and just be a practice that does interesting stuff. To be influential. And I deliberately put no limit on that. And we stay, the fact that all our work is public is something that won't go away. So the combination of those two things gives us, I guess, the future for what we're doing.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's been really insightful and very sort of, inspiring to hear how you guys have, just the story of, that kind of consistency and the sort of the gradual growth is very, it's so nice to hear that persistence pays off, and that it's not just sort of a big break type of thing.
Oh no,
There's
definitely not.
That kind of illusion can exist sometimes, where you kind of think, oh, just waiting for the break. Actually, no, it's just being consistent.
The break is also, I can see how that would be something that you would want. As somebody who's maybe, when you're just starting, that you want the big break. Yeah. And to say, actually, maybe it's 10 years worth of work is what I need to do isn't probably what you want to hear at that point. But for us, that's been true. And luckily, we're now kind of seeing the fruits of that.
And could you just tell us a little bit about your urban research newspaper that you've been doing over the last few months?
Yeah, so we've been publishing a newspaper called The Unlimited Edition. We did the first 3 issues of that in 2011, 2012, in response to a request for a kind of cultural grant of about £5,000. It was just a quick project. And it's become a kind of longer standing series, which we've recently resurrected on the occasion of our new office and relocation. So what we do is the newspapers are always really locally specific. Yeah. We look at a very particular place, and we kind of cast our eye over it and find stories that might be interesting, strands or themes of research that are interesting in relation to that place. And then we give the newspaper away for free. So that's the sort of really important thing as well, particularly in the one that we did previously in 2011, 2012 in Whitechapel, that we look at a place, we put together a whole bunch of really interesting stories and content about it, and then we give it out for free. And in fact, in that case, we stood on the high street and put it into people's hands. And that's a good way of reminding yourself that you have to be relevant to people. If you're going to piss them off by stopping them in the street, you have to say, actually, this is really interesting. We stand by it. We believe in it. So the Unlimited Edition is this series of newspapers set in different places, and we always invite different contributors. So it's not just written by us. There's a couple of things by us in there, but also contributions and articles from other people. And we found that to be a really good way of introducing yourself to people, gathering really interesting content, having interesting conversations, but introducing yourself to new spheres of work and of investigation. So at the point where we first did that paper, it was just something that we were interested in, thought might be a curious thing to do. But actually, since then, urban research has become a whole strand of the work that the practice does. So we've got a couple of researchers, both from non-architectural backgrounds. They both did kind of politics and philosophy and economics, those kind of things. But we really enjoy the opportunity to look at cities and look at places and to unpick the dynamics of what's happening in those places and think about the implication for how they're going to grow or change in the future, which seems to me to be totally fundamentally kind of architectural and urban, and totally relevant to the work of the practice.
And do you find that this has been really kind of crucial in gaining new work in terms of, you know, your clients and people actually being like, oh wow, actually that's quite a good level of engagement, and it kind of adds to the depth of understanding of those sort of areas that you're working in? It's
been a surprisingly good tool, actually, partly because we've made some good friends and contacts through it. For example, the first issues that we're looking at Whitechapel High Street were happening at a time when the Mayor of London was looking very specifically at high streets and what high streets mean for London. They've since invested about £185 million in high street regeneration projects. So a newspaper that is just talking about high streets was really relevant to them. Yeah. And that actually was one of the first times that we met with the regeneration team at the Mayor's office, was to talk about this newspaper, which seems kind of inconsequential, but actually now is like a really large proportion of the work that we do is working with that team. So it's been really interesting. It's also taken us to places that I would never have thought that it would. So we submitted the paper to be part of an exhibition called Archizines, which toured all over the world. And actually I went to Buenos Aires when the exhibition was happening there, funded by the British Council. So the newspaper also took me to Argentina, which we never would have expected. So there's something about, I guess, exposing yourself to different influences and something about publicity as well, that the newspaper has kind of led to.
And you're positioning yourself as an authority, essentially, as well, because you're being the one that's kind of curating all this kind of research and, you know, making it available to other people. It's kind of, you know, you put yourself in the position of an expert.
Yeah, I mean, now I feel much more comfortable saying yes to that question, to that idea. I think at the time we would have thought, well, it's just, you know, a collection of things that we think are interesting. But now, no, I think you're probably right. We do think that.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, thanks.
And that is a wrap. Thank you for listening today. If you're looking for more time, freedom, impact, and income as an architect, get instant access to my free 4-part architect profit map by visiting freearchitectgift.com. Today's podcast is sponsored by AIA Advantage partner BQE Software, the makers of ArchiOffice. ArchiOffice is the only office and project management software designed specifically for architects. It helps you manage people and projects while you focus on designing great architecture. So whether you're working remotely or on-site, ArchiOffice allows you to monitor the status of your projects and tasks and send out invoices in an accurate and timely manner. Get your fully functional 15-day trial of ArchiOffice by going to businessofArchitecture.com/demo. The views expressed on this show by my guests do not represent those of the host, and I make no representation, promise, guarantee, pledge, warranty, contract, bond, or commitment except to help you conquer the world.